terrifying scale of Australia's bushfire disaster is beginning to emerge. A mass exodus...
2020 is a hard year so far. Nothing seems to make sense, and we've kind of lost all of our agency as a species. Maybe I should replay Firewatch. I really like that game. Maybe it'll take my mind off the futility of it all.
5 hours later.
Campo Santo's 2016 walking simulator, Firewatch, was one of the first games I played when I was getting back into video games in early 2018, so it means a lot to me. It's a sorrowful, somber thriller about a middle-aged man named Henry trying to run from his past. Like many descendants of classic adventure games, Firewatch runs a few choices by the player over the course of the story that can change Henry's path, small dialogue differences and various interactions with the world that make small differences in the script but feel notable as you're doing them. A lot of games work like this, letting the player have a small part in authoring the story through predetermined choices, which is good because a lot of people praise games that allow you to choose and personalize your experience. The problem then comes when you remember that people don't like making choices. If you'll forgive my brief generalization, with an acknowledgement that I cannot speak for all people and therefore the statement is inherently flawed, and you'll have to see this point through to the end, but you won't because people leave when things get hard, and I'm crying again. God, this game brings up feelings. People don't like making choices in video games because the choices offered and the choices promised are almost never the same thing.
Breaking ground by allowing the player to do literally anything. Let's look at an example. In this scenario, the player has just infused a bicycle with the soul of his great-great-great-uncle Hermophilides. From this point, he might use Hermophilides' ethereal presence to detect nearby mineral deposits, or perhaps he might train the bicycle in the art of undoing temporal paradoxes. It seems that the player has chosen to use the haunted bicycle to deceive townsfolk.
Complete and total freedom to choose makes art meaningless. If I wanted to write my own story, I would. So a powerful choice does not exist for the player to completely control the narrative, but to offer a pretense of control. Our decisions take place only within the limited parameters of the game's code, because without those parameters, as seen in the previous clip, any semblance of story would collapse in on itself. Players spent years trying to figure out how to keep Aerith alive in Final Fantasy VII, convinced that somewhere deep within the game's code contained the perfect combination to make Sephiroth not do the stabbing that he does so very well. While it speaks to the power of this moment, what sort of game would Final Fantasy VII be if it didn't have Aerith's death in it? It wouldn't be Final Fantasy VII, that's for damn sure. So, in order to tell good stories, there has to be a structure, but player choice and player freedom can deviate from structure because personal agency doesn't have narrative thrust. We don't want Aerith to die because she is a lovely little waifu, but the game needs her to die because that's the story being told. In The Walking Dead Season 1's final episode, the player can choose to cut off Lee's zombie-bitten arm or allow him to keep it with the knowledge that keeping the arm guarantees the virus will spread to Lee's heart. All the difficulties later in the episode were completely worth it, because a 3-limbed man is better than a 4-limbed zombie. And then he gets paler. It didn't matter that you cut off the arm, the only thing you did was make saving Clementine a little harder. It didn't matter. You did everything you could and you still succumb. You still die. And Lee still never meets the young woman his surrogate daughter grows up to be. But 3 seasons later, amputation works, when AJ takes control and saws Clem's bitten leg off to prevent her from turning. She survives because of the story. Lee dies because of the story. You couldn't change it because that's not the story being told. Lee's story is one of redemption through destruction, leaving behind a girl who has become equipped in this world, where Clem's story is about regaining the humanity her father figure taught her all those years ago. Clem can't die, and Lee can't live. Outside of any logical inconsistencies, the issue here is that The Walking Dead tells you up front that your decisions will impact the story being told, and that, and say it with me kids, Clementine will remember that. You impact the story in many other ways, but the core conflict of this series is completely left up to the writer's linear design, a direct contradiction from Telltale's stated philosophy that these stories are up to the decisions of the players. So what's the answer? I still can't explain why naming the dog in Firewatch affected me. But here, in the game's sublime opening, you can choose between the two dogs that Henry and his wife Julia can adopt. I picked Bucket, the beagle. Later, in a conversation with Henry's boss Delilah, he mentions Bucket by name. That was my call. That's my dog. Throughout the opening, you can choose little details about Henry's life leading up to his tenure in the Wyoming forests, building the sort of man he is in the player's mind. There's nothing that claims that these choices matter. They're binary decisions that often mean little more than an alternate dialogue path later on. Whether you get Bucket or the German Shepherd Mayhem doesn't change Julia's early onset Alzheimer's, and it doesn't change that Brian Goodwin died in that forest long before you arrived. But if you're taking the role-playing seriously, which is always the best way to experience a game, these moments feel different. Which type of man discovers the horrible truth about Brian's death? The hardened and jaded man who left his wife to rot in a home? The emotional coward who couldn't handle the pressure? Or somebody in between? You can never save Brian, you can never see Delilah, and you can never apologize to Julia, but you maintain this character throughout the experience. You build him with these minor choices in the beginning and throughout the game that allow you to empathize with and understand Henry in a way that a solely static narrative can never do, because there is always a barrier between the choices the characters make and what the player would. There's always a barrier no matter how hard you try. There's always something in the way. I tried and tried, but I couldn't break the barrier. There isn't synergy, there's only voyeurism. But not with Henry, because I understand him. I understand why he made those choices. I understood his romanticism, his self-hatred, his fury at the world for dealing him an unfair hand, his regret at how he treated his wife before she became a shell of the woman he married. It's similar to how I felt about Byleth while playing Fire Emblem Three Houses. The only major decisions that you can make in that game, who to recruit, who to train, and who to woo, feel personal because nowhere in the game are those choices invalidated. I got Ignatz and Marianne to become close, and at the end of the game I got a small little text box telling me that they got married. It didn't matter, it didn't change anything notable about the game, but I got tears in my eyes reading about how my most precious students fell in love. That was my choice. Shit, I'm stalling. Sorry. The decisions that matter in a person's life aren't the decisions to cut off an arm, or to somehow save the princess, or to merge with the Reaper, or to tell the truth about augmentations, or even to have phone sex with your boss. Unless your life is far more interesting than mine, most of these probably won't happen. They're high fantasy, and sometimes the final fantasy. Exceptional stories about exceptional people. We want payoff to them. We want the most powerful moments of storytelling to mean something. If I am ever in the situation to cut off an arm, I'm cutting off the damn arm and it will work. Because that's how stories are supposed to go. But deciding what dog to get with your wife, or choosing who your friends are, or trying your best to make sure everyone's okay, or deciding what to tell your daughter about the world, or deciding if you should keep making video essays about games even though the project has fallen apart time and time again like a sign from a malevolent god. That's what matters. It's meaningless, but it matters so much. What kind of person Lee is depends on what he tells Clementine. What kind of person Henry is depends on how he reacts to Julia's job offer. And what kind of person I am depends on if I keep doing this. Doing game mechanics won't be the most important decision of my life, and that decision would make a shitty game. But it tells me who the hell I am. It doesn't decide a life, but a moment. Getting Bucket is just a moment, a meaningless choice that changes one line of dialogue. But it's the most human thing in a game all about the human experience. And it's one of the few choices in games that sticks around and refuses to be invalidated because it doesn't matter enough to be, and it doesn't have the gall to pretend otherwise. A little marker didn't pop up above my head when I decided to make this video saying Davey will remember that. When I die, this decision will probably have been long forgotten by me and everyone I love. But right now, despite a lot of things screaming at me to do otherwise, to look forward to the big decisions, to look forward to cutting off my arm or saving Detroit, all I want to do is get a dog. And I choose Bucket.